An infertile millionaire visits his father in a luxury nursing home, believing it to be just another routine meeting. But a boy appears out of nowhere and asks, "Have you come to visit Grandpa too?" Intrigued, he decides to investigate, and when he discovers whose son the boy was, he is shocked. Watch until the end to see how it all turns out. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The pristine hallways of Evergreen Seniors Resort gleamed under soft lighting as Alexander Sterling's Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor. The scent of lavender and sanitizer mingled in the air, a reminder that this wasn't just any luxury establishment. It was a high-end retirement home where Manhattan's elite spent their golden years. Alexander adjusted his Armani tie, a habit he'd developed over 2 decades of corporate negotiations. At 45, he was one of New York's most successful venture capitalists, known for his shrewd business acumen and unwavering determination. His visits to his father were as methodical as his business dealings, scheduled, brief, and devoid of emotional attachment. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the corridor. As he approached the elevator, a small voice pierced through his thoughts. "Are you here to visit Grandpa too?" Alexander turned, startled by the unexpected question. A boy, no more than 8 years old, stood before him, wearing a backpack covered in superhero stickers. His bright blue eyes sparkled with innocent curiosity. "Excuse me?" Alexander's voice carried its usual authoritative tone, though slightly softened by confusion. "Grandpa, he's on the 5th floor. Do you want to come with me? I know the way." The child's enthusiasm was disarming, his smile genuine and warm. Before Alexander could formulate a response, the boy had already pressed the elevator button. "I'm Tommy," he continued, rocking back and forth on his heels. "Mum says I talk too much, but Grandpa likes it when I tell him about school and my friends." Alexander found himself following the child into the elevator, his mind racing. His father had never mentioned other visitors, let alone a grandson. There had to be some mistake. "Which room are you heading to?" he asked, maintaining his composure despite the growing unease in his stomach. "Room 502, Tommy announced proudly. "Grandpa always saves the best cookies for me, the chocolate chip ones from the cafe downstairs." Alexander's heart skipped a beat. Room 502, his father's room. The elevator doors opened to the 5th floor and Tommy bounded out, his backpack bouncing with each step. Alexander followed, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. The boy stopped in front of room 502, reaching for the door handle with familiar ease. Inside, Richard Sterling sat in his usual leather armchair by the window, reading. Glasses perched on his nose as he flipped through a newspaper. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his cashmere sweater spoke of the wealth he'd accumulated over a lifetime of business success. "Grandpa!" Tommy rushed forward, throwing his arms around the elderly man. Richard's face lit up with a warmth Alexander had never seen before. "There's my boy," he exclaimed, returning the embrace with genuine affection. Then his eyes met Alexander's, and the smile faltered slightly. "Alexander," Richard straightened in his chair. "I wasn't expecting you today." "Clearly," Alexander replied, his gaze fixed on the scene before him. His father, the man who had never once attended his school events, who had missed his college graduation, who had treated every interaction like a business meeting, was showing more affection to this child in one moment than Alexander had received in a lifetime. Tommy looked between them, his young face scrunched in confusion. "Do you know each other?" Before either man could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway with a clipboard. "Mr. Sterling, I need you to sign these updated visitor forms," she said, then noticed Alexander. "Oh, good morning, Mr. Sterling Jr. Will you be signing as well? We need to update the list of approved visitors." "List of visitors?" Alexander moved toward the clipboard, his business instincts taking over. As his eyes scanned the document, one name stood out. Sarah Mitchell, listed as Richard's daughter, with visitation rights equal to Alexander's own. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Alexander's world, built on carefully, controlled variables and predictable outcomes, began to crumble around him. He had a sister he'd never known existed, And somehow, this little boy who had innocently led him to this moment was his nephew. Alexander's fingers tightened around the clipboard as memories flooded his mind. Every Christmas dinner spent in silence, every birthday acknowledged with nothing more than a check, every attempt at connection met with cold indifference. All of it took on a new, darker meaning. While he had been struggling for scraps of attention, his father had been nurturing another family, showing them the love and warmth he'd never received. Alexander, his father's voice cut through his thoughts. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Tommy, sensing the tension, clutched his backpack straps. Grandpa, did I do something wrong? No, my boy, Richard assured him quickly. Why don't you go to the garden for a bit? Mrs. Patterson is probably feeding the birds right now. You know how she loves your company. As Tommy reluctantly left the room, Alexander placed the clipboard on a nearby table with deliberate slowness, his movements controlled despite the trembling he felt inside. The familiar scent of his father's pipe tobacco filled the air, a smell that had once represented authority and distance, now tainted with deception. How long? Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. Richard removed his reading glasses, folding them with careful precision. Sarah was born 3 years after you. Her mother... It was complicated. Complicated? Alexander's laugh was bitter. Was it complicated when you missed my high school graduation because of a business emergency? Was it complicated when you told me I needed to learn independence and cut off my college funding, forcing me to work 3 jobs while studying? Tell me, Father, were you teaching Sarah the same valuable life lessons? You don't understand, Richard began, but Alexander cut him off. No, I understand perfectly. While I was trying to earn your approval, trying to become the son you wanted, you were playing the doting father to another family. The cookies, the hugs, the proud grandfather. Was this all some sort of cosmic joke? Alexander moved to the window, staring out at the manicured gardens below. He could see Tommy there, chatting animatedly with an elderly woman who was tossing breadcrumbs to pigeons. The boy's innocence and joy were painfully familiar. He'd once been that age, yearning for his father's attention. Your mother, Richard spoke softly. She wanted you to focus on achievement. She believed that showing too much affection would make you soft. I agreed with her then. It was a different time, different beliefs about raising children. And Sarah, what convenient parenting philosophy did you apply there? After your mother passed, I realized how wrong we'd been. But by then you were already shaped by our mistakes. You were becoming successful but distant, just like me. I thought it was too late to change things between us. Alexander turned back to face his father, seeing for the first time the weight of regret in the old man's eyes. So you channeled all your reformed parenting into Sarah and her son. Did it help ease your conscience? No, Richard admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. Every time I showed Sarah or Tommy affection, I was reminded of what I denied you. Every smile, every moment of pride, it was accompanied by the knowledge of my failure as your father. A knock at the door interrupted them. The nurse returned, this time with a photo album that had fallen from the bookshelf during cleaning. As she placed it on the side table, it fell open, revealing pictures Alexander had never seen before. His father, at what appeared to be a school play, beaming proudly, a birthday party with balloons and cake, a graduation ceremony, all moments shared with a dark-haired woman who bore a striking resemblance to their father. Alexander picked up the album, his hands shaking slightly. Does she know about me? Yes, Richard replied. Sarah has known. About you her entire life. She's tried to reach out several times over the years, but I always intervened. I was afraid of this moment, afraid of facing my own failures. The weight of these revelations pressed down on Alexander's shoulders. His carefully constructed world, built on the foundation of being Richard Sterling's only heir, his only disappointment was crumbling. He wasn't just the successful but lonely son anymore. He was a brother, an uncle, part of a family dynamic he'd never known existed. Sarah Mitchell sat in her modest apartment's kitchen, stirring her coffee, absently as she stared at the worn envelope before her. Inside was a letter she'd written to her brother years ago, but never sent, one of many. The morning sun cast shadows through the window, dancing across the paper's yellowed surface. The sound of her phone ringing startled her from her reverie. The caller ID displayed Dad, and her heart rate quickened. He rarely called this early unless it concerned Tommy. "Dad, is everything okay? Is Tommy—" "Sarah." Her father's voice was strained. "He knows." Those two words made her sink back into her chair. After 35 years of secrets, the truth had finally emerged. "How?" she managed to ask. "Tommy," Richard explained. "He met Alexander in the hallway, assumed he was another visitor. One thing led to another." He paused. "Sarah, I think it's time." She closed her eyes, memories flooding back. The countless times she'd watched her brother from afar, at charity galas, business functions, even once at a coffee shop near his office. She'd known every detail of his life through news articles and business magazines. While he hadn't known, she existed. "Where is he now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Still here. Sarah." "He's angry, hurt. But there's something else. When he looks at Tommy," Richard's voice softened, "I see a longing I haven't seen since he was a child himself." Sarah's gaze drifted to the family photos on her wall. Pictures of Tommy at various ages, always smiling, always surrounded by love. The kind of childhood she'd had, and the kind Alexander had been denied. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said, already reaching for her keys. The drive to Evergreen Seniors Resort was a blur of emotions and memories. Sarah remembered the day she'd first learned about her brother. She was 12, and her mother had finally told her the truth about her father's other family. Instead of feeling jealous or angry, she'd been fascinated by the idea of a big brother. She'd created elaborate fantasies about meeting him, about having a protective older sibling who would look out for her. Reality had been far more complicated. As she grew older and understood more about her father's choices, she'd seen the pain inflicted on both families. Her mother had loved Richard deeply, but accepted her role as the secret second family, believing it was best for everyone. Sarah had watched her brother's career from afar, recognizing in his driven personality the same need for approval she'd once felt herself. Pulling into the parking lot, Sarah caught sight of Tommy in the garden with Mrs. Patterson, her sons. Carefree laughter floated across the morning air, a stark contrast to the tension she was about to face. Inside the building, her steps echoed through the familiar hallways. She'd walked this path countless times, but today felt different. Today she wasn't just Richard Sterling's secret daughter, she was Alexander Sterling's sister, stepping out of the shadows and into his life. As she approached room 502, voices drifted through the partially open door. Alexander's tone was controlled but laden with emotion, and every time I achieved something, every milestone, every success, I thought it would finally be enough, that you'd finally show some pride, some warmth. But now I understand. You were capable of those feelings, just not for me. Sarah's hand trembled as she pushed the door open. Two pairs of eyes turned to her, her father's, filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension, and Alexander's widening with recognition. "I've seen you before," he said slowly, his brow furrowing. "At the Thompson Charity Gala last year." "You were watching me from across the room." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "I've been to several events where you were speaking, always at a distance, always wanting to approach, but what?" Alexander's voice was sharp. "Afraid it might disrupt your comfortable arrangement?" "Afraid of exactly this," she replied quietly. "Afraid of causing you pain, of disrupting your life, of forcing you to confront something you never asked for." The siblings stood facing each other, 35 years of unspoken words hanging between them. Sarah saw in Alexander's face the same determination she often saw in the mirror, the same proud set of the jaw they'd both inherited from their father. "Tommy," Alexander said suddenly. "Oh, he has your eyes, but that stubborn chin, that's all Sterling." A small smile tugged at Sarah's lips despite the tension. He has the sterling business sense too. He's already running a thriving playground trading card operation. For a moment, something softened in Alexander's expression. Then his walls came back up. Why now? After all these years of watching from the shadows, why not stay there? Sarah moved to the window, watching Tommy in the garden below. Because he deserves better than secrets, she said finally. Because I'm tired of pretending that half of his family doesn't exist, and because, she turned back to Alexander, you deserve to know that you have people who care about you, even if we've been kept apart. Alexander's laugh was hollow. Care about me? You don't even know me. I know more than you think, Sarah replied. I know you worked as a janitor during your first year of college to make ends meet. I know you started your first company with nothing but a loan from a former professor who believed in you. I know you anonymously fund scholarships for underprivileged students, even though you maintain a public image of cold pragmatism. He stared at her, clearly unsettled by the depth of her knowledge. Research is easy enough with the right resources. It wasn't research, she said softly. It was connection. Every article, every piece of news about you, I collected them all. Every achievement, every setback, I felt them as if they were my own. When you lost that big telecom deal in 2019, I couldn't sleep for days worrying about how you were handling it. Richard shifted in his chair, drawing both his children's attention. Sarah, perhaps we should... No, Alexander cut him off. Let her speak. I want to hear how my shadow sister justified watching my life from the sidelines while enjoying all the fatherly love I was denied. Sarah's eyes flashed. You think it was easy? Growing up knowing I had a brother who didn't know I existed? Watching Dad struggle with his guilt every time he showed me affection? Having to hide who I was, who my father was, from everyone in my life? She moved to her father's bookshelf, pulling out a worn photo album different from the one Alexander had seen earlier. Look at these pictures, Alexander. Really look at them. She opened the album, pointing to a photo of a teenage girl sitting alone at what appeared to be a graduation ceremony. This was my high school graduation. Dad couldn't attend because you had a business dinner the same night. He chose to be with you. She flipped to another page. My college acceptance celebration, cancelled because you were receiving an award for youngest CEO in your sector. Every moment of joy in my life was tempered by the knowledge that showing too much happiness might make Dad feel guilty about what he couldn't give you. Alexander took the album, his hands moving over the photographs. Each image told a story of celebration tinged with restraint, of happiness held in check. He paused at a picture of Sarah holding a newborn Tommy. Her, smile radiant but her eyes carrying a familiar sadness. Tommy's father, he said suddenly. Where is he? Sarah's expression tightened. He left when I told him I was pregnant, said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. She smiled wryly. Another thing we have in common, brother. We both know what it's like to face life's biggest challenges alone. Tommy's laughter drifted up from the garden, drawing their attention again. Alexander watched as his newly discovered nephew expertly negotiated with another child over trading cards. He really does have a head for business, Alexander murmured. He asks about you, you know, Sarah said quietly. Not you specifically. He asks about his uncle, the successful businessman who's always too busy to visit. I've told him stories about your achievements, your determination. You've been his role model without even knowing it. The weight of this revelation seemed to hit Alexander hard. He sank into a nearby chair, still holding the photo album. All these years, he said, more to himself than to the others. I thought I was alone in carrying the weight of our father's legacy. But you were carrying it too, weren't you? Just in a different way. Sarah moved closer, cautiously placing a hand on her brother's shoulder. When he didn't pull away, she felt something shift between them. A tiny crack in the wall of resentment and misunderstanding that had separated them for so long. We can't change the past, she said gently. But maybe we can build something new, for Tommy's sake, if nothing else. Alexander looked up at his sister, seeing in her face the same determination, the same strength he'd relied on throughout his own life. For the first time, He allowed himself to wonder what it might have been like to have had her by his side all along. The following days passed in a blur of emotions and tentative interactions. Alexander found himself unable to focus on work, his thoughts constantly drifting to the revelation that had upended his carefully ordered world. His corner office in Manhattan's financial district, once his sanctuary, now felt like a glass cage filled with hollow achievements. One morning, as he absently scrolled through emails, his assistant Jennifer knocked on his door. "Mr. Sterling, there's a young man here to see you. He says his name is Tommy." Alexander's head snapped up. Through the glass walls, he could see Tommy standing in the reception area, wearing his school uniform and that same superhero backpack, with Sarah hovering uncertainly behind him. "Send them in," he said, straightening his tie automatically. Tommy bounded into the office with the uninhibited enthusiasm of youth. "Wow, your office is even cooler than Mum said it would be. Can you really see the whole city from here?" Before Alexander could respond, Sarah stepped forward. "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced. Tommy insisted on delivering this himself." She handed Alexander an envelope decorated with childish drawings. Inside was an invitation written in careful elementary school handwriting. "Dear Uncle, Alexander, you're invited to my school's career day next Thursday. Mum says you're the best businessman in New York, and I want to show my class that my uncle is cooler than Jimmy Parker's uncle, who just owns a pizza place. Please come. Love, Tommy." Alexander stared at the invitation, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. The word uncle written so naturally, as if it had always been true. The pride in Tommy's voice when he talked about him. The trust in those innocent eyes that saw him not as the cold, successful executive, but as family. "I understand if you're too busy," Sarah said quickly. "I told Tommy that you probably have important meetings and—" "What time?" Alexander interrupted, surprising himself as much as Sarah. Tommy's face lit up. 9 o'clock, and Mum says you can come for breakfast at our place first if you want. I make really good pancakes. Well, Mum helps, but I flip them myself." Alexander found himself smiling despite his usual professional demeanor. Breakfast sounds perfect. After Tommy had explored every corner of the office and Sarah had finally managed to lead him out, Alexander sat back in his chair, looking at the invitation again. His schedule for next Thursday showed 3 important meetings, including a potential merger discussion that could make his company millions. Without hesitation, he pressed the intercom. "Jennifer, clear my schedule for next Thursday morning. All of it." The following Thursday, Alexander found himself standing outside Sarah's modest apartment building in Brooklyn, feeling strangely nervous. He'd faced billion-dollar negotiations, with less anxiety than he felt about a simple family breakfast. The apartment was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of coffee and pancakes. Family photos covered the walls, not the formal portraits that had dominated his childhood home, but candid shots full of genuine smiles and spontaneous moments. "Uncle Alex," Tommy called from the kitchen. "Come see, I'm making your pancake. Extra special." In the kitchen, Tommy stood on a step stool, carefully monitoring a pancake on the griddle. Sarah worked alongside him, subtly guiding his movements while maintaining the illusion of his independence. "He insisted on making yours in the shape of a dollar sign," Sarah explained with a small smile. "He says it's because you're good at making money." Alexander watched the domestic scene before him, so different from his own solitary breakfasts of protein shakes and business news. Tommy's face was scrunched in concentration as he attempted to flip the oddly shaped pancake, and Sarah's gentle encouragement reminded him of the maternal warmth he'd lost so early in his own life. "Perfect flip," Tommy exclaimed triumphantly, as the pancake landed mostly intact. "See, Uncle Alex, I told you I could do it." "You certainly did," Alexander replied, surprised by the warmth in his own voice. "That's quite impressive, Tommy. You know, being good at pancakes is a lot like being good at business. It takes practice, patience, and the courage to flip things over sometimes." Tommy beamed at the comparison, while Sarah shot Alexander an appreciative glance. She'd been worried about how her pragmatic, business-focused brother would interact with an 8-year-old, but here he was, naturally bridging the gap between their worlds. The drive to Tommy's school was filled with the boy's excited chatter about his classmates and teachers. Alexander found himself absorbing every detail, recognizing in Tommy's stories the same desire for recognition and approval he'd once felt himself. "Jimmy Parker's going to be so surprised," Tommy said for the third time. "He's always bragging about his uncle's pizza place, but wait until he sees your presentation." Alexander glanced at Sarah in the rearview mirror. "Presentation?" "All the parents and guests are expected to give a short talk," she explained. "Nothing fancy, just a few minutes about what you do. I should have mentioned it earlier, I'm sorry." "It's fine," Alexander assured her, though his mind was already racing. He'd given countless presentations to boards and investors, but speaking to a room full of third graders about the intricacies of venture capitalism seemed suddenly daunting. The school was a cheerful building with children's artwork decorating the windows. As they walked through the corridors, Tommy proudly pointing out his contributions to the wall displays, Alexander noticed how other parents and teachers watched them curiously. Clearly, the arrival of the famous Alexander Sterling at a public school career day was causing quite a stir. In Tommy's classroom, children sat cross-legged on a colorful carpet, while parents and other presenters lined the walls. A boy who must have been Jimmy Parker was whispering and pointing at Alexander, clearly impressed by the perfectly tailored suit and designer briefcase. "Class," Tommy's teacher announced, "we're very fortunate to have with us today Mr. Alexander Sterling, Tommy's uncle and one of New York's most successful businessmen." As Alexander stood before the class, he suddenly remembered being Tommy's age, standing in front of his own class for a similar presentation. His father had been too busy to attend, sending instead a junior executive who barely knew their family. The memory sparked something in him, and he set aside the business-focused speech he'd been mentally preparing. "Good morning, everyone," he began, setting down his briefcase. "Who here has ever had a really good idea but didn't know how to make it happen?" Hands shot up across the room, including Tommy's, waving enthusiastically. "Well, that's what I do. I help people turn their good ideas into reality." He pulled out a deck of trading cards from his briefcase, the same kind he'd seen Tommy trading in the garden. "Let's say Tommy here has figured out that these cards are worth more when traded in certain combinations. That's a good idea. But maybe he needs help getting more cards or finding more people to trade with." The children leaned forward, suddenly engaged. Even Jimmy Parker had stopped whispering and was listening intently. "My job is to help people like Tommy grow their good ideas. Sometimes that means providing money to buy more cards. Sometimes it means introducing them to other people who can help. And sometimes it means teaching them how to make their good idea even better." For the next 15 minutes, Alexander led the class through a simplified version of business development, using examples they could understand, from lemonade stands to trading cards. He watched Tommy's face beam with pride as his classmates asked questions and engaged with the presentation. Sarah, watching from the back of the room, felt tears prickling at her eyes. She'd seen her brother on television giving corporate speeches, but this was different. Here, explaining complex concepts to children with patience and understanding, she saw glimpses of the man he might have been if their father had shown him more warmth and guidance. After the presentation, as children crowded around Alexander, asking questions about their own business ideas, Tommy approached with Jimmy Parker in tow. "Uncle Alex," Tommy said proudly, "Jimmy wants to know if you could help his uncle's pizza place become as big as Pizza Hut." Alexander knelt down to their level, treating the question with the same seriousness he would give any business proposal. "Well, Jimmy, that's an interesting idea. Sometimes the best businesses aren't about being the biggest. They're about being the best at what makes them special. What makes your uncle's pizza place special?" As Jimmy launched into an enthusiastic description of his uncle's secret sauce recipe, Sarah watched her brother interact with the children. Each question was met with thoughtful responses, each idea treated with respect. This was a side of Alexander Sterling that the business world never saw. A man capable of genuine connection, of nurturing potential, of being the kind of mentor he himself had never had. In the weeks following career day, Alexander found himself drawn more and more into Tommy and Sarah's world. Weekend brunches became a regular occurrence, and his normally pristine office now featured a growing collection of Tommy's drawings proudly displayed on one wall. However, this newfound family harmony was about to face its first real test. Tuesday afternoon, as Alexander was reviewing quarterly reports, his phone buzzed with Sarah's number. Something about the midday call felt wrong. She never called during business hours unless it was important. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "It's Tommy." Her voice was tight with worry. "He's in the hospital. Nothing serious," she added quickly. "Just a broken arm from falling off the monkey bars at school. But they need a guardian to sign some forms, and I'm stuck in traffic. I'm still 20 minutes away, and he's scared." Alexander was already grabbing his coat. "Text me the hospital. Details, I'll be there in 10 minutes. The familiar efficiency that made him a successful businessman took over as he navigated through the hospital corridors. Yet when he reached Tommy's room and saw his nephew's tear-stained face, all corporate instincts fell away. "Uncle Alex." Tommy's voice wobbled slightly. "Look what I did to my trading arm." Alexander moved to the bed, taking in the sight of Tommy's right arm, still waiting to be set in a cast. "Well, this is quite the business setback," he said, keeping his tone light despite the concern in his chest. "But you know what successful business people do when they face setbacks?" Tommy sniffled. "What?" "They adapt, find new strategies." Alexander sat on the edge of the bed. "I once broke my arm skiing when I was about your age. Learned to write with my left hand out of necessity. By the time the cast came off, I could write with both hands. Very useful for signing contracts quickly." The doctor entered with forms, looking relieved to see an adult present. As Alexander signed the paperwork, he noticed Tommy watching him intently. "Uncle Alex," Tommy said thoughtfully, "does this mean you'll have to teach me to write with my left hand too, for business purposes?" Alexander felt something catch in his throat. The trust in Tommy's eyes, the automatic assumption that his uncle would be there to help him through this challenge, it was so different from his own childhood experiences of facing difficulties alone. "Of course I will," he promised, just as Sarah burst into the room, hair windblown and face flushed from rushing. "Tommy, baby, are you okay?" She rushed to the bed, enveloping her son in a careful hug. "Mom, Uncle Alex is going to teach me to be ambidextrous," Alexander supplied with a small smile. Sarah looked between them, taking in Tommy's brightened expression and the protective way Alexander hovered near the bed. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I didn't know who else to call." "I'm his uncle," Alexander replied simply, surprising himself with how natural those words now felt. Later that evening, after Tommy had been settled at home with his new blue cast, chosen because it matched his uncle's favorite tie, Alexander found himself sitting in Sarah's small kitchen, sharing a much-needed cup of coffee. "He was so brave," Sarah mused, staring into her cup. "But you know what really helped? Having you there. He keeps saying how his uncle came to rescue him just like a superhero." Alexander shifted uncomfortably. "I just signed some forms." "No," Sarah corrected gently. "You made him feel safe, protected. Do you know how long I've wished he could have that kind of male presence in his life? Someone strong and reliable who shows up when needed?" The implication hung in the air that Alexander was becoming the kind of figure for Tommy that their father had never been for either of them. The thought was both empowering and terrifying. The following Sunday, Alexander made his usual visit to Evergreen Seniors Resort, but this time with a different purpose. He found his father in the garden, watching residents play chess. "I need to understand something," Alexander said without preamble, settling into the chair beside Richard. "When Tommy was in the hospital this week, Sarah called me. Me, not you." "Why?" Richard's hands tightened slightly on his wheelchair armrests. "Because she knew you would come. Just like she knows I would have found a reason not to. Like you did with me. All those times I needed you." "Yes," Richard admitted quietly. "Alexander, seeing you with Tommy, It's like watching a mirror. That shows what I should have been, what I could have been if I hadn't been so afraid. Afraid? Alexander turned to look at his father. What could the great Richard Sterling possibly have been afraid of? Of feeling too much, of showing weakness. Richard's voice grew distant. When your mother was pregnant with you, my own father told me that showing too much emotion would make you soft. That business success required emotional distance. I believed him, just as he had believed his father before him. Alexander thought of Tommy's face lighting up whenever he entered a room, of the pure joy in those small moments of connection. We were wrong, he said softly, all of us. Success without emotion isn't success at all. No, Richard agreed, it's just survival. Sarah understood that somehow. She raised Tommy with all the love and openness that our side of the family feared. And look at him, bright, confident, unafraid to feel. They sat in silence for a moment, watching a pair of sparrows hop across the garden path. Finally, Richard spoke again. When Sarah told me she was keeping Tommy, that she would raise him alone, I offered her money, just as I had done with you. But she refused. She said she didn't want her child to think love could be bought. That was the moment. I realized how badly I had failed you. Alexander remembered all the checks, the expensive gifts that had arrived precisely on birthdays and Christmas, always accompanied by brief, formal notes. You thought providing financially was enough. I thought it was everything, Richard corrected. I measured my success as a father by the size of your trust fund, the prestige of your schools, the weight of your business card. I never understood that what you needed, what both of you needed, was simply to know you were loved. A commotion from the chess tables drew their attention. One of the residents had managed to checkmate another, and their gleeful celebration brought a small smile to Alexander's face. Tommy asked me something interesting yesterday, he said. He wanted to know if being a good businessman means you can't also be a good person. Apparently, some kid at school told him that all rich people are mean. Richard turned to his son, his eyes suddenly sharp. And what did you tell him? I told him that being successful in business is like playing chess, Alexander replied, nodding toward the residents. You can win by taking all your opponent's pieces, leaving them with nothing. Or you can win by protecting your own pieces, making smart moves and helping the whole board reach its best possible outcome. The choice is yours. The pride in Richard's eyes was something Alexander had rarely seen. You're teaching him what I should have taught you. I'm teaching him what Sarah taught me, Alexander corrected. In just these few weeks, watching her with Tommy. I've learned more about true success than in 20 years of business school and board meetings. Richard reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and placed it over Alexander's. Then perhaps there's hope for the Sterling legacy after all. Not in our bank accounts or business empires, but in the way Tommy looks at you, the way I should have looked at my own children. The autumn colors were just beginning to paint Central Park when Sarah received the news that would test their newly formed family bonds. Her small consulting firm had been offered a prestigious year-long contract in London. The opportunity was incredible, but the timing couldn't have been more complicated. She sat in Alexander's office after hours, watching the city lights flicker to life below. I don't know what to do, she admitted. This contract could secure Tommy's future, give him opportunities I never dreamed of providing. But moving across the ocean now, just when he's finally getting to know his family. Alexander stood by the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. The thought of Tommy leaving created an unexpected ache in his chest. Over the past months, his nephew had become a fixture in his life. Weekend visits, impromptu office drop-ins, late-night calls about homework questions that somehow turned into hour-long conversations about life and dreams. What does Tommy think about it? He asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Sarah ran her fingers through her hair, a gesture Alexander had come to recognize as a sign of distress. He's excited about London, the adventure of it all. But this morning he asked if his Uncle Alex would be able to visit him every weekend like he does now. When I explained how far London is, she trailed off, her voice thick with emotion. Alexander turned from the window, his business mind already calculating possibilities. What if you didn't have to choose? What do you mean? My company has been looking to expand into the European market. We've been considering opening a London office for months now. He moved to his desk, pulling up some files on his computer. The board has been pushing me to oversee the expansion personally. Sarah's eyes widened. Alexander, you can't reorganize your entire business just because what? Because my family needs me? He met her gaze steadily. Isn't that exactly what we've been learning these past months? That success means nothing without connection. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah remembered their father's attempts to solve problems with money and business solutions, but this felt different. Alexander wasn't trying to buy his way out of emotional involvement. He was trying to find a way to maintain it. I need to show you something, she said suddenly, reaching for her bag. She pulled out a worn notebook, its pages filled with childish handwriting. Tommy's been keeping a diary since he broke his arm. His teacher suggested it might help him process everything happening in his life. She opened to a recent entry and handed it to Alexander. His eyes moved over the uneven letters. Dear Diary, today Uncle Alex taught me about stocks and shares. He says it's like trading cards, but with bigger numbers. He let me sit in his special chair during our lesson and said I asked smarter questions than most of his business partners. When I grow up, I want to be just like him, but Mom says I should keep my kind heart too. Uncle Alex says that's the most important part of business anyway. He's different now than when we first met him. He smiles more and his eyes look happier. Mom says that's because love changes people. I think she's right. Love, Tommy. Alexander sat heavily in his chair, the diary entry blurring slightly before his eyes. He sees me differently than I see myself, he said, quietly. He sees you truly, Sarah corrected. The man you've become since you let yourself care about something more than success. The brother I always hoped you'd be. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jennifer, Alexander's assistant, entered with an apologetic smile. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Shanghai team is waiting for your video call, Mr. Sterling. Alexander looked at the diary in his hands, then at his sister. Years of business training told him to prioritize the call. Millions could be at stake, but Tommy's words echoed in his mind. Love changes people. Reschedule Shanghai, he said firmly. Family meeting in progress. Jennifer's surprise was visible, but she nodded and withdrew. Sarah raised an eyebrow at her brother. The Alexander Sterling I first met would never have postponed a Shanghai call. The Alexander Sterling you first met didn't know what he was missing. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Now, about London. I have some ideas about how we can make this work for all of us. The solution, when they finally worked it out, was characteristically Sterling in its ambition, but uniquely their own in its execution. Alexander would indeed open the London office, but not as a full-time venture. Instead, he proposed a bicontinental arrangement, 2 weeks in London, 2 weeks in New York, with video calls filling the gaps. It's not conventional, he admitted during a family dinner at Sarah's apartment, where they were breaking the news to Tommy. But then again, neither is our family. Tommy sat at the kitchen table, his blue cast now covered in signatures and drawings, processing the information. So, we're moving to London, but you'll be there too. Like really there, not just on the computer. Really there, Alexander confirmed. In fact, I've already started looking at apartments near where you and your mum will be living. Close, enough for impromptu pancake breakfasts. Tommy's face lit up, but then clouded slightly. What about Grandpa? Who will visit him when we're all in London? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sarah and Alexander exchanged glances, years of complicated emotions passing between them. Actually, Sarah began carefully, we've been talking about that. The London facility where I'll be working has a sister location here in New York. They've agreed to let me split my time too, working remotely when possible. We thought maybe Grandpa would like to try living with me during the weeks we're here. Alexander watched his sister as she spoke, admiring her capacity for forgiveness and growth. Despite everything, she was willing to open her home to their father, to give Tommy the chance to maintain that relationship. "Your grandfather," Alexander added, addressing Tommy but looking at Sarah, "has a lot to teach us about what not to do. But he also has a lot to teach us about how to make things right when we've made mistakes." Later that evening, after Tommy had gone to bed full of excitement about their upcoming adventure, Sarah and Alexander sat on her small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine. "Do you remember," Sarah said, looking out at the city lights, "that first day at the retirement home, when Tommy accidentally brought us together?" Alexander nodded, swirling the wine in his glass. "I was so angry. I thought he'd ruined everything, my perfectly ordered life, my understanding of who I was. And now? Now I understand that he saved me." Alexander set his glass down, turning to face his sister. "All those years of chasing success, of trying to prove something to a father who couldn't show love. I was building an empire of emptiness. Tommy showed me there was another way." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "He has that effect on people. When his father left, I thought my world was ending, but Tommy, Kari, he just kept loving, kept believing in the good in people. He taught me that family isn't about who shares your blood, it's about who shares your heart." Speaking of sharing, Alexander said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I had my lawyers draw something up. I'd like you to look it over." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a legal document, paperwork to make Alexander Tommy's legal guardian in the event anything ever happened to Sarah. But more than that, it included provisions for Tommy's future, educational trusts and business investments held in his name. "Alexander," Sarah breathed, scanning the documents, "this is too much." "It's not enough," he corrected. "Tommy showed me what it means to be family. This is just making official what's already true in my heart. He's not just my nephew. He's my chance to break the sterling cycle of emotional distance, to prove that success and love aren't mutually exclusive." Tears sparkled in Sarah's eyes as she looked at her brother, this man who had transformed from a cold, successful executive into someone who understood that the richest portfolios are the ones filled with love and connection. The London townhouse Alexander had chosen was a perfect blend of classic British architecture and modern comfort, located in a quiet street near Hyde Park. As he watched Tommy race through the empty rooms, excitedly planning where everything would go, he couldn't help but smile at how different this was from his usual property investments. "This room has to be my office," Tommy declared, standing in a sun-filled space overlooking the garden. "It's perfect for business meetings, just like yours in New York, Uncle Alex." Sarah appeared in the doorway, carrying a box of Tommy's belongings. "Business meetings? I thought this was going to be your bedroom, mister." "Mom," Tommy said with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious, "every good businessman needs a proper office. Uncle Alex said so." Alexander caught Sarah's eye and shrugged apologetically. "In my defense, I was talking about his homework space." The sound of their laughter echoed through the empty house, filling it with the warmth of family. Something Alexander had never considered when purchasing properties before. Usually, his real estate decisions were based purely on investment potential and market analysis. But this time, he'd found himself considering things like the distance to Tommy's new school, the safety of the neighborhood, and whether the kitchen was big enough for their family pancake breakfasts. As they began unpacking, Alexander received a video call from their father. Richard's face appeared on the screen, settled in his new room at Sarah's New York apartment. "How's the move going?" Richard asked, his eyes taking in the chaos behind them. "Grandpa," Tommy rushed to the phone, "you should see my new office. Well, Mom says it's my bedroom, but I'm negotiating the terms." Richard chuckled, a sound that still surprised Alexander with its warmth. "Negotiating with your mother? That's a brave business strategy, young man." "I learned from the best," Tommy replied proudly, glancing at Alexander. The comment sparked something in Alexander's memory. All the times he'd tried to negotiate with his own father, always in terms of achievements and expectations, never about feelings or needs. How different things were now, watching Tommy freely express his desires, knowing they would be heard even if not always granted. Later that evening, after Tommy had finally been convinced that a bedroom could also serve as a perfectly respectable office space, Alexander found Sarah in the kitchen arranging dishes in the cabinets. "He's handling the move better than I expected," she said, reaching for another plate. Alexander took it from her, placing it on a higher shelf. Kids are resilient, especially when they feel secure in their relationships. "Speaking from experience?" Sarah asked gently. Alexander paused, thinking about his own childhood moves. From one prestigious boarding school to another, each transition marked by formal letters from their father's secretary rather than personal goodbyes. "I'm speaking from observation," he replied. "Watching you with Tommy, it's been an education in what real parenting looks like, what real family looks like." Sarah stopped arranging dishes and turned to face her brother. "You know, when I first agreed to this arrangement, splitting time between London and New York, I worried it might be too complicated, that we were trying too hard to keep everything perfect. And now I realize that perfect isn't the point. The point is showing up, being present, making the effort. Like you're doing," she smiled. "The Alexander Sterling I met 6 months. Kaggle would never have reorganized his entire business empire just to stay close to an 8-year-old boy. The Alexander Sterling you met 6 months ago didn't know what family meant," he admitted. "I thought I was mentoring Tommy in business, but he's been teaching me about something far more valuable." A crash from upstairs interrupted their conversation, followed by Tommy's voice. "I'm okay, the business files just fell over." Sarah and Alexander exchanged knowing looks before heading upstairs together. They found Tommy attempting to arrange his books and toys in a way that mimicked Alexander's office layout. "Perhaps," Alexander suggested, kneeling down to help pick up the scattered items, "we should consider a different organizational system, one that allows for both business and pleasure." Tommy considered this, his face serious. "Like how you have photos of us in your office now, even though they're not business-related." "Exactly," Alexander smiled, "because sometimes the most important assets aren't the ones you can list on a balance sheet." The autumn term at Tommy's new British school brought unexpected challenges and revelations for the entire family. Alexander, who had always prided himself on having a solution for every business problem, found himself navigating unfamiliar territory. "They're saying I talk funny," Tommy confided during one of their video calls during Alexander's New York weeks. "And I don't know all the right words for things, like it's not an elevator, it's a lift, and cookies are biscuits." Alexander leaned closer to the screen, noting the worry in his nephew's eyes. "You know, Tommy, when I first started doing business internationally, I faced similar challenges. Different terms, different customs. Want to know what I learned?" Tommy nodded eagerly. "Being different isn't a weakness. It's an opportunity. Those differences make you unique, give you a perspective others might not have." Alexander smiled. "Besides, think of it as expanding your business vocabulary." The suggestion sparked something in Tommy. Over the next few weeks, he started keeping a notebook of British terms and customs, approaching his cultural adjustment like a market research project. His teacher, impressed by his methodical approach, asked him to give a presentation to the class about American and British differences. Sarah watched all this with a mixture of pride and amazement. "You've given him a framework for handling challenges," she told Alexander during one of their family dinners in London. "He doesn't just cope with problems now, he analyzes them, looks for opportunities." "I'm just showing him what I wish I'd known at his age," Alexander replied. "That difficulties aren't failures, they're data points to learn from." The learning, however, wasn't just on Tommy's side. One evening, as Alexander was preparing for a major board meeting in his London office, Tommy arrived with Sarah for their weekly dinner plans. The boy immediately noticed his uncle's tense demeanor. "Bad day at work?" Tommy asked, climbing into his favorite chair in Alexander's office. "Just a challenging presentation tomorrow," Alexander answered, still frowning at his laptop screen. "Sometimes it's hard to make people understand the value of long-term investment over quick profits." Tommy tilted his head thoughtfully. "Like how Mum says I have to eat vegetables now to be healthy later." Alexander looked up, surprised by the parallel. Actually, yes, exactly like that. Well, Tommy continued, pulling out his British-American translation notebook. My teacher says that sometimes the best way to explain hard things is to tell a story that people already understand. Maybe you could explain it like vegetables. Alexander stared at his nephew, then began to laugh. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured, already reaching for his presentation notes. Tommy, how would you like to help me rewrite this proposal? That night they worked together, translating complex financial concepts into simple metaphors that anyone could understand. Tommy's innocent perspectives and straightforward questions forced Alexander to strip away the corporate jargon and focus on the essential truths of his proposal. The next day, the board not only approved his long-term investment strategy, but praised its clarity and innovative presentation. When he shared the news with Tommy, the boy beamed with pride. See, business is just like making friends at a new school, Tommy said wisely. Sometimes you have to find new ways to help people understand you. Sarah, who had been quietly watching their interaction, felt tears prick her eyes. Her son, who had once faced the prospect of growing up without strong male guidance, was now not only receiving mentorship, but providing it in his own innocent way. And her brother, who had spent decades building walls around his emotions, was learning to see the world through the eyes of a child. You know what this calls for? Alexander announced, closing his laptop decisively. I think it's time for an emergency ice cream meeting. Or should I say, ice lolly meeting? Tommy giggled at the British term. Uncle Alex, ice cream is still ice cream here. But you have to ask for a flake with it. It's very important for business relations. The London winter brought with it unexpected challenges that tested their newly formed family bonds. As Christmas approached, the reality of balancing their bi-continental life became more complex than any of them had anticipated. But why can't we do both? Tommy asked during breakfast, his half-eaten toast forgotten as he worked on what he called his family logistics proposal. We could have Christmas morning in London, then take the superfast plane to New York and have Christmas dinner with Grandpa. Alexander, who was in London for his 2-week rotation, exchanged glances with Sarah across the kitchen island. The Concorde doesn't exist anymore, buddy, he explained gently, and even private jets can't make time zones disappear. Tommy's face fell and Sarah saw the familiar crease appear between Alexander's eyebrows, the one that always showed up when he was trying to solve a particularly challenging problem. What if, Alexander said slowly, we brought New York to London? And so began Operation Sterling Christmas, as Tommy dubbed it. Alexander threw himself into the planning with the same intensity he usually reserved for corporate mergers. His assistant Jennifer found herself coordinating not market analyses, but the logistics of flying Richard from New York to London, complete with medical clearance and a private nurse for the journey. Sarah watched her brother transform their London townhouse into a winter wonderland, paying attention to every detail that might make their father comfortable. You know, she said one evening as they wrapped presents together, this is the first time we'll all be together for Christmas, all 4 generations of Sterlings. Alexander paused in his methodical paper folding. I was thinking about that. About all the Christmases before, they were always so formal, Sarah supplied. Like a business function with tinsel? Exactly. But watching Tommy get excited about every little thing, the decorations, the songs, even the tacky Christmas sweaters he insists we all have to wear, Alexander smiled. It makes me realize what we missed, what I want to do differently. Baltimore. Day before Christmas Eve, Richard arrived at Heathrow Airport looking both exhausted and excited. Tommy, who had insisted on making a proper welcome sign complete with business-appropriate font choices, bounced impatiently as they waited at the private terminal. Grandpa, he called out as soon as Richard appeared, waving his sign proudly. Welcome to the London branch of Sterling Enterprises. Richard chuckled, moving carefully with his walker. The London branch, eh? And what position do you hold in this enterprise, young man? Chief of Christmas Operations, Tommy replied seriously. Uncle Alex says every successful project needs a clear organizational structure. As they settled Richard into the townhouse, Alexander noticed how his father's eyes kept moving around the space, taking in the family photos on the walls. Tommy's artwork proudly displayed on the refrigerator, the general lived-in warmth that permeated every room. "This isn't what I expected," Richard said quietly when they had a moment alone. "What did you expect?" "Something more sterling-like, chrome and glass, minimum emotion, maximum efficiency." Richard gestured to a wall where Tommy had hung paper chains and homemade decorations. "This is something else entirely." Alexander followed his father's gaze. "I learned that efficiency isn't everything. Sometimes the messiest parts of life are the most valuable." "Your mother," Richard hesitated. "She would have hated this. All this emotional display, this embracing of chaos. She believed in order above all else." "And you?" Alexander asked, watching his father carefully. Richard was quiet for a long moment. "I believed in whatever kept me from feeling too much, from risking too much. But watching you now with Tommy, with Sarah, even with me, I realize how much I lost by being afraid to feel." Their conversation was interrupted by Tommy's excited voice from upstairs. "Uncle Alex! Grandpa! Mom says it's time for the Christmas sweater ceremony." "Christmas sweater ceremony?" Richard raised an eyebrow. Alexander grinned, reaching into a nearby shopping bag. "Tommy's idea. He says if we're going to be a proper family, we need proper family traditions, including matching sweaters." "Matching sweaters?" Richard looked genuinely alarmed for the first time since his arrival. "Don't worry," Alexander assured him, pulling out a surprisingly tasteful dark green sweater with a subtle silver pattern. "I negotiated the design choices. No reindeer or flashing lights." "You're different here," Richard observed as Alexander helped him up. "More human?" Alexander suggested. "It turns out that being a good businessman doesn't mean you have to stop being a good person. Tommy taught me that." Christmas Eve brought with it a light dusting of snow, transforming London into a scene from a holiday card. Tommy woke everyone early, insisting they follow his carefully planned schedule for the day. "First," he announced, reading from a notebook decorated with business stickers and holiday drawings, "we have the traditional sterling breakfast meeting, featuring Mum's special pancakes and Uncle Alex's famous hot chocolate." Sarah, still in her pajamas, couldn't help but smile at how her son had transformed their simple family breakfast into an official-sounding event. "And what's on the agenda for this breakfast meeting, Mr. Chairman?" "We need to discuss the strategic implementation of today's activities," Tommy replied seriously, though his eyes sparkled with excitement. "And Grandpa needs to tell us stories about when you and Uncle Alex were little." Richard, who had been quietly observing from his place at the table, looked startled. "Stories about their childhood?" "Yes." Tommy pulled out a chair next to his grandfather. "Mum says it's important to know family history for proper future planning." Alexander, who was methodically preparing his signature hot chocolate, a skill he'd perfected over the past months of family breakfasts, felt his chest tighten. Their childhood stories weren't exactly the stuff of heartwarming holiday tales, but Richard surprised them all. "Did I ever tell you about the time your uncle tried to start his first business?" he asked Tommy. "He was about your age." Sarah and Alexander exchanged shocked looks as their father launched into a story they'd never heard before, about how a young Alexander had attempted to create a neighborhood newspaper, complete with stock reports copied from their father's Wall Street Journal. He was so serious about it, Richard recalled, his voice warm with an emotion they'd never heard before. "Had his little briefcase, went door to door selling subscriptions. He paused, looking at Alexander. "I was proud of your initiative. I should have told you that." The morning unfolded in unexpected ways. Stories that had been buried under years of formal distance and emotional restraint began to surface. Richard, perhaps inspired by Tommy's genuine interest or softened by the holiday atmosphere, shared memories that revealed glimpses of the father he could have been, moments of pride, flashes of love that had been hidden behind stern business lessons. "What about Mom?" Tommy asked Sarah during a pause in the stories. Did she try to start any businesses when she was little? Sarah laughed. Actually, I was more interested in art. I used to draw all the time. Really? Alexander turned to his sister. I didn't know that. There's a lot we don't know about each other, Sarah said softly. Maybe that's something we can change. Tommy, who had been taking notes in his notebook, complete with business-appropriate bullet points, looked up. I think we need a new department in Sterling Enterprises, he announced, the Family History and Future Planning Division. And what would this division do? Alexander asked, playing along. Collect stories, make sure we remember everything. Important and plan more family traditions. Tommy flipped to a new page in his notebook. Like this Christmas, we need to document everything so we can do it exactly the same next year. Richard cleared his throat. Tommy, in business and in life, sometimes the best traditions aren't the ones that are exactly the same each time. Sometimes they grow and change as we do. Everyone stared at Richard, surprised by this uncharacteristically profound observation from the man who had once insisted on strict adherence to established protocols in all things. Grandpa's right, Alexander said, giving his father an appreciative nod. The best business strategies are adaptable. The same goes for family traditions. Sarah watched as her son considered this, his face scrunched in concentration. So, we can keep the matching sweaters, but maybe change the design next year. Exactly, she laughed. And maybe next year we'll have new stories to add to our family history. Speaking of stories, Richard said, reaching for a package he'd insisted on keeping close since his arrival, I brought something I think you all should see. He carefully unwrapped a leather-bound album, its pages yellowed with age. These are pictures from before everything got complicated, when I still remembered how to feel. As they gathered around the album, Tommy squeezed. Between his mother and uncle, they discovered a different Richard Sterling in those pages. A young father playing with baby Alexander, candid shots of him reading to a toddler Sarah, moments of unguarded joy that had been buried under decades of corporate armor. As winter melted into spring, the Sterling family found themselves settling into a rhythm that none of them had thought possible 6 months ago. The London office was thriving under Alexander's innovative leadership style, which now incorporated lessons learned from his most unexpected mentor, Tommy. One particularly sunny April morning, Alexander sat in his London office, reviewing a presentation when his intercom buzzed. Mr. Sterling, there's a Mr. Sterling Jr. here to see you about an urgent business matter, his assistant announced, barely containing her amusement. Tommy strode in, wearing a child-sized suit that was an exact replica of his uncle's favorite business attire, complete with a mini briefcase. Sarah followed, mouthing sorry over their son's head, though her eyes sparkled with mirth. Uncle Alex, I need your expert opinion on a business opportunity, Tommy declared, opening his briefcase with flourish. He pulled out a carefully drawn business plan, complete with colorful charts and stickers. This looks very professional, Alexander noted, accepting the document. What's the venture? The school spring fair committee needs new leadership, Tommy explained seriously. Current management isn't meeting expected targets for fun and excitement. I'm proposing a complete restructuring. Alexander caught Sarah's eye, seeing his own barely suppressed smile mirrored on her face. I see. And what changes would you implement under your leadership? Tommy launched into a detailed presentation, complete with hand gestures he'd clearly learned from watching his uncle's business meetings. His proposal included everything from a new international food court, inspired by their family's dual-continent lifestyle, to a business skills workshop where kids could learn to trade cards more effectively. And here's the best part, Tommy continued, flipping to his final page. All profits will go to the school library fund, because, as you always say, Uncle Alex, true success means helping others succeed too. Alexander felt something catch in his throat. Those words, his new business philosophy, born from months of learning to balance success with compassion, coming from Tommy's mouth with such certainty and understanding. That's exactly right, Tommy. But tell me, what made you think of the library fund? Tommy's expression grew serious. Well, some kids can't afford to buy new books, like my friend Marcus. He loves reading even more than trading cards, but his mum says books are too expensive. So I thought, if we make the fair really good, everyone wins. Marcus gets new books, other kids have fun, and the school gets better. That's good business, right? Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on Tommy's shoulder. When did you become so wise, my little businessman? I learned from the best, Tommy replied, beaming at his uncle. Uncle Alex says business isn't just about making money, it's about making things better. Alexander stood from behind his desk, moving to kneel in front of his nephew. You know what, Tommy? I think your proposal needs something more. What would you say to having a senior partner in this venture? Tommy's eyes widened. I mean maybe it's time for your first real business collaboration. Sterling and Sterling Junior Enterprises. What do you say? The boy launched himself into his uncle's arms, professionalism momentarily forgotten in pure joy. Yes, but wait. He pulled back, face serious again. Does this mean I get my own office? Let's start with a dedicated homework space, Sarah interjected quickly, causing Alexander to laugh. Later that evening, as they celebrated Tommy's first official business venture over dinner, Alexander received a video call from their father. Richard's face appeared on the screen, looking more animated than usual. I just got Tommy's email about his new business partnership, Richard announced without preamble, complete with a formal proposal for Grandpa Consulting Services to be retained on an advisory basis. He insisted on sending it himself, Sarah explained. Said it was more professional that way. Richard's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. It's remarkable, you know. He somehow managed to combine the best of all of us, Sarah's compassion, Alexander's business sense, and your attention to detail, Alexander finished, surprising himself with the compliment. Every good trait we have came from somewhere, Dad, even the ones we tried to hide. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Tommy, absorbed in explaining his spring fair plans to his grandfather, remained blissfully unaware of the profound moment passing between the adults. I've been thinking, Richard said finally. Perhaps it's time I made some changes too. The doctors say I'm strong enough to travel more regularly now. If you'll have me, I'd like to spend more time here in London, be more involved in everything. The school spring fair became a turning point for the Sterling family in ways none of them could have predicted. Under the guidance of Sterling and Sterling Junior Enterprises, with special consultation from Grandpa Sterling, the event transformed into something that brought together not just the school community, but their own family as well. Richard arrived a week before the fair, insisting on being involved in the final preparations. To everyone's surprise, he threw himself into the work with an enthusiasm they'd never seen before, offering practical suggestions that showed he'd been paying attention to all of Tommy's excited updates about the project. The International Food Court needs proper flow management, he explained while helping Tommy set up the layout. Just like in any successful business, customer experience is key. Alexander, watching his father and son work together, felt a complex mix of emotions. There was a twinge of old pain, seeing his father give Tommy the kind of hands-on guidance he'd never received, but it was overshadowed by gratitude. The cycle was breaking. The Sterling legacy was being rewritten. The day of the fair dawned bright and clear. Tommy, dressed in his junior executive suit, was taking his role as co-chairman very seriously. Uncle Alex, he called out as they did their final walkthrough. We need to inspect the book fair section. That's our most important investment. The book fair had become Tommy's passion project. He'd worked out a system where kids could earn extra tokens for the fair by helping younger students with reading, ensuring that everyone, regardless of their financial situation, would have access to new books. You know, Sarah said quietly to Alexander, as they watched Tommy explain his token system to a group of impressed teachers. He's nothing like what I feared when I first found out I was having a boy. What do you mean? I was scared he'd turn out like the old Sterling men, cold, distant, success-obsessed. She smiled. Instead, he's shown us all a different way to be successful. The fair was a triumph. The International Food Court, featuring recipes from the diverse school community, brought people together over shared meals. The Business Skills Workshop, modified to teach kids about fair trading and value creation, became an unexpected hit with both children and parents. But it was the book fair that truly showcased the new Sterling philosophy. By the end of the day, every child, including Tommy's friend Marcus, went home with at least one new book. The library fund exceeded its goals, and more importantly, a new school reading program was born, inspired by Tommy's token system. "This," Richard said, as they watched Tommy proudly present the final results to the school principal, "this is true success. Not just the numbers, but the impact, the connections made, the lives changed." Alexander looked at his father, hearing the unspoken regret in his voice. "It's never too late to learn new ways of measuring success, Dad." That evening, as they celebrated at home, Tommy presented them all with official certificates of appreciation, carefully designed on his computer with a little help from his mother. "To Grandpa Richard Sterling," he read aloud, "for teaching us that wisdom comes from learning from our past choices." Richard accepted the certificate with suspiciously moist eyes. "To Mom, for showing us that love is the best business strategy." Sarah hugged her son close, pressing a kiss to his head. "And to Uncle Alex," Tommy's voice filled with pride, "for proving that being successful and being kind are not mutually exclusive options." Alexander accepted his certificate, but then reached for his briefcase. "I have something for you too, Tommy." He pulled out an official-looking document. "This is your first real business assessment. As your senior partner, I've been evaluating your performance." Tommy took the paper with slightly trembling hands, his expression a mix of excitement and nervousness. As he read, his eyes grew wide. "Exceptional leadership skills demonstrated through innovative problem-solving and community impact," he read aloud. "Particularly noteworthy is the candidate's ability to balance profit motives with social responsibility, showing an advanced understanding of modern business principles." "Keep reading," Alexander encouraged. "Based on this performance, Sterling and Sterling Junior Enterprises is hereby approved for expansion, with the junior partner to be granted additional responsibilities and—" Tommy's voice rose with excitement. His own desk in the London office. 1 year had passed since that fateful day at Evergreen Seniors Resort. Alexander stood in the same hallway where Tommy had first approached him, but everything felt different now. The cold marble floors that had once echoed with his solitary footsteps now rang with the sound of family conversation and laughter. They were all there for a special occasion, the official opening of the Evergreen Community Library, a joint project between Sterling Enterprises and the retirement home, inspired by Tommy's successful school book fair initiative. And here, Tommy was explaining to a group of residents, "We have the Reading Buddy program. Just like at school, but now seniors can earn points for reading with kids from the neighborhood. Grandpa says it's a win-win situation." Richard, who had become an enthusiastic participant in all of Tommy's ventures, beamed with pride. His own transformation over the past year had been remarkable. The stern patriarch who once measured everything in profit margins now spent his time between London and New York, actively involved in what he called the family's most important investments, their relationships with each other. Sarah approached Alexander, handing him a cup of coffee. "Remember standing here a year ago? You were so angry when you found out about me." "I wasn't just angry," Alexander reflected, watching Tommy demonstrate the library's new computer system to an elderly resident. "I was terrified. Finding out I had a sister, a nephew, it meant everything I thought I knew about myself, about our family, was wrong. And now I understand that being wrong was the best thing that could have happened to me." He turned to his sister. "You and Tommy, you showed me what I'd been missing all those years, focusing only on financial success." Their conversation was interrupted by Tommy's excited voice. "Uncle Alex, come quick! Mrs. Patterson wants to invest in our next project." Alexander laughed, moving to join his nephew. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who had once shared bird-feeding duties with Tommy, was now one of his biggest supporters in the retirement community. "Young Mr. Sterling here tells me you're planning to expand the Reading Buddy program to other retirement homes," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I think my investment portfolio could use some social responsibility ventures." As Alexander listened to Tommy pitch their expansion plans with a perfect blend of business acumen and genuine enthusiasm, he marveled at how naturally his nephew balanced the sterling business instincts with true compassion. Later that afternoon, as the family gathered in Richard's old room, now transformed into a cozy library corner, Tommy pulled out his ever-present notebook. "I've been thinking," he announced in his business voice, though his eyes danced with excitement. "We should document everything that's happened this year, like a case study for future sterling generations." "A case study?" Sarah asked, amused. "Yes, about how finding family can be the best business decision ever." Tommy flipped open his notebook. "I've already started the outline, Chapter 1, How a Chance Meeting Changed Everything." Alexander felt his throat tighten as Tommy began reading his account of their first meeting in the hallway. The boy's perspective was both innocent and profound, capturing not just the events, but the emotions that had transformed their family. And then, Tommy read, "Uncle Alex learned that being successful doesn't mean being alone. And Mum learned that having secrets isn't as good as having family. And Grandpa learned that it's never too late to change your business model." Richard chuckled, softly. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured, using the phrase that had become something of a family motto over the past year. "But the most important lesson," Tommy continued seriously, "is that love is the best investment you can make. It has the highest returns and never goes bankrupt." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as Alexander pulled Tommy into a tight hug. "When did you get so wise, buddy?" he asked. "I learned from watching all of you," Tommy replied simply. "Making mistakes, fixing them, trying to do better. That's good business practice, right?" The summer sun was setting over London, casting a golden glow through the windows of the Sterling townhouse. The family had gathered for what Tommy called their annual performance review, the anniversary of that first meeting at Evergreen. Alexander stood in the kitchen, helping Sarah prepare dinner while Tommy and Richard set the table, their conversation punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. The scene was so different from the formal family dinners of his childhood that sometimes he still had to remind himself it was real. "Uncle Alex," Tommy called from the dining room, "can we use the special plates, the ones from the New York office?" "Of course," Alexander replied, smiling at the memory of how those plates had come to be. Tommy had insisted that proper business dinners needed proper dinnerware, so they'd specially commissioned plates with the Sterling and Sterling Junior Enterprises logo for their London and New York offices. As they settled around the table, Tommy cleared his throat importantly. "As junior partner, I'd like to present our annual family assessment." He pulled out a folder decorated with stickers and careful calligraphy. "First," he began, "our international operations have exceeded all expectations. The London-New York connection is stronger than ever, with regular cultural exchange programs." He winked at his mother, referring to their frequent family trips between the two cities. "Second, our investment in emotional capital has shown remarkable returns. Grandpa's happiness index has increased by approximately 100%. This earned a hearty laugh from Richard, who couldn't deny the accuracy of the assessment. And finally, Tommy's voice grew softer, more serious. "We've proven that the Sterling family legacy isn't just about business success, it's about love, forgiveness, and second chances." Alexander looked around the table at these faces that had become so dear to him. Sarah, his sister, who had shown him that strength could coexist with tenderness. Richard, their father, who had found the courage to change decades of ingrained behavior. And Tommy, the unexpected catalyst who had brought them all together. "I have something to add to the assessment," Alexander said, reaching for his briefcase. He pulled out a document and handed it to Tommy. "This makes it official." Tommy's eyes widened as he read. "Really? We're really doing it?" Sarah peered over her son's shoulder, gasping as she understood. The document outlined plans for a new charitable foundation, the Sterling Family Trust for Education and Community Development. Its first project would be expanding their successful Reading Buddy program nationally. "Tommy's initiatives have shown us what real success looks like," Alexander explained. "It's time we took those lessons to a bigger scale." "And look at the organizational chart," Richard pointed out softly. 4 equal partners. Indeed, the foundation would be jointly led by all 4 Sterlings, with Tommy's role specifically focused on program development and community engagement. But that's not all, Alexander continued, pulling out another envelope. Sarah, this is for you. Inside was a deed to the London townhouse transferred into Sarah's name. Alexander, I can't, she began, but he held up his hand. For years, I thought owning things was the same as having something real, he said. But you and Tommy taught me that home isn't about property ownership, it's about family. This just makes official what's already true. This is your home, our home. Tommy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. Does this mean we're staying in London permanently? It means, Sarah explained, her voice thick with emotion, that no matter where business takes us, we'll always have a home here, together. Like a permanent merger, Tommy exclaimed, business terminology never far from his mind. Exactly, Alexander laughed, the most successful merger in Sterling history. As they continued their celebration, sharing stories and plans for the future, Alexander reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. He had gone from being a successful but lonely businessman to part of a vibrant, loving family. His definition of success had transformed completely. Uncle Alex, Tommy said, pulling him from his thoughts, I've been thinking about our next venture. Oh? What did you have in mind? Well, Tommy's eyes sparkled with that familiar mix of business sense and compassion. I was thinking about all the other kids out there who might need help finding their families. Not just kids like me, but anyone who feels alone. Maybe we could help them too. Alexander looked at his nephew, this remarkable child who had taught him more about love